Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. Today, Dick and I are joined by an old friend, Anthony Portantino, who also happens to be an elected representative in the state of California. He's a member of the California State Senate. And we met Anthony, oh my God.
Years ago.
So, Anthony, I think it was before you ran for the California State Assembly.
Yeah, we met over 20 years ago at the church, I think.
Right. At the
That's right. I don't know. Well,
With Catherine Blue, I think.
At Pasadena Unitarian Universalist Church.
Right.
Catherine, that's right, Catherine. And yes, back in those days, and Betsy and John.
Yeah, over 20 years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. So, Anthony, we want just to talk to you about your journey. This is just a very informal conversation, really not about anything specific except for your journey as a member of the California Assembly and the California State Senate. So go ahead and start talking.
Well, first of all, it's great to see you guys. And it has been over 20 years that we've, our paths have crossed, our friendship has blossomed. So I really appreciate you. And, when you launched the Progressive and just became such a strong voice for LA and a counterpoint to traditional media. It's just been great to see how you guys have, taken that online role so seriously and done such a great job with the platform you've created. So I'm glad to be here in sort of my final months in the legislature to talk about, what I've done and sort of the same time period that you've done what you've done. And yeah, I think what I take away from my life in the public is I never thought I would ever do this. I wasn't one of those people who said, I'm going to be an elected official. I'm going to run for office. What a lot of people find hard to believe, which is actually true, is I grew up sort of shy and reserved. And, I was the youngest in a big Italian family. And when everybody would yell and scream in the house, I would sort of shudder from the noise. And so I didn't like to be the center of attention. And it sort of all happened by accident, which is why I sort of think differently about the political process because, I ran for the city council first when a gentleman in office passed away, died in office. And I was 38 years old at the time. And the city that I lived in, there was a rift between the city council and the school district. They didn't get along. And here you had all these young families with kids in schools. And it seemed important to have a voice on the city council that supported public education. And so that's what drew me into this, conversation about representing, that school family voice on a city council that, had a bunch of folks who had no connection to public education. And so that's what got me to run the first time. And I did it the old fashioned way. I went out and I knocked on 3,000 doors and met lots of people and ultimately got elected. And what sort of changed sort of about me at the time is when all the people that I knocked on their doors started to call me and ask me to help. And I went, holy cow, this is an awesome responsibility. You meet people and then you get in a position to help them. And that's always been my modus operandi. It's always been what's driving me is you have this opportunity to help people, you better damn use it. And so I did 8 years on the city council, and then I had the honor to run for the state assembly. And everybody said, well, you can't win that seat. Your city's only 4% of the district, and Pasadena's 35% of the district, and the representative is going to come from the big city, not the small city. And you know what? I just went out and I introduced myself to folks. I went to neighborhood meetings, PTA meetings, churches, community forums, and I didn't ask anything. I just, listened and learned and developed relationships. And lo and behold, I ended up getting elected to the assembly. And as I did when I was on the city council, I had a list of things to do. And when I went to Sacramento and I rolled out my to-do list, my staff went, no one comes here with a to-do list. I said, well, I do. I am. Here's my list. Let's go do it. And so, that's why I think a little bit differently than everybody else, because to me, it's the relationship with people that matter And many of the ideas I have put into laws have come from those conversations with folks on street corners.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons that you have become a friend to us,
Right.
because you've actually never represented us. We've never lived in your district. We live in Los Angeles, but there's something about you. You're open to hearing. I mean, we have lobbied on behalf of our church. Our church was in your district, on behalf of our friends and educators in that area. So we've come to your office, and also we were members of the ACLU.
Right.
But you were always open to hearing whatever the concerns were, and to being reasonable about what you could or could not do.
Right.
So in your long productive career here in the state legislature, almost you represented a large Armenian community in
Yeah.
Glendale, before you were telling us you took yet another trip to visit Armenia. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, first of all, I love my district because it is one of the most ethnically diverse districts in the state of California. I have a very large Armenian American population, a large African American population, a large Latino American population, a large Korean population, and a large Chinese American population, and a large Filipino population. So I like to say my district is California, because it is so ethnically diverse. It's socioeconomically diverse too. I have some, very wealthy neighborhoods. I have some very poor neighborhoods. But I have a lot of just average working people neighborhoods. And so that's what I've tried to be, is sort of to get involved in all of those different communities and be the voice of the different perspectives in my district. And one of the things that's been exciting for me is I've had the opportunity to go to Armenia 5 times. And I just came back from my 5th trip, which actually ended up being my longest trip. It was 20 days. And I was invited to guest lecture at the American University in Armenia, which was chartered by Cal decades ago. And I had toured it on a number of times, but I'd never had a chance to lecture or have conversations directly with the students. And so they sent out an email to all of their political science professors and government professors and said, who wants Senator Portantino to come to your class? And lo and behold, 9 professors invited me to their classes. And I over a 2-week period, I did a number of lectures, and which were really more conversations, which I think was the fun part for me. When you ask students what they think, they share their perspective. And in Armenia, there's been the recent war where the Azerbaijanis attacked Artsakh. There was a revolution 5 years ago. There's been lots of different political perspectives and population shifts and COVID, and the students have a lot to say. And the cool part for me is then I participated in a global Armenian summit while I was there to just talk about the Armenian diaspora and big picture Armenian issues. And one of the questions I was asked is, what advice do I have for those folks who are planning the future of the country? And I said, well, if I were you, I would ask the students, because you're planning their future. They should have a seat at the table as you plan their future, because I've just spent 2 weeks hearing multitude of perspectives. The other cool thing about talking to the students is many of them disagreed with each other on core geopolitical issues. They had strong disagreements, but you know what? They sat next to each other in class. They were friends with each other in class. The conversations were not vitriolic. They were not angry. They were passionate, and there were disagreements amongst the students on core issues, but yet they were camaraderie and friends and just classmates, without the anger that we see so much in the US on issue disagreements become so personal here, where the students there kept it on the issue and not on the personality. It was really nice to see.
Yeah. So speaking of vitriolic types of interactions, over the 20 years that you've been involved in politics, we've seen a shift in politics and the tone and tenor of the way that people communicate with each other from both sides of the aisle. What's that been like for you, being on the inside?
Well, it's interesting because obviously I'm actually writing an article about sort of, we used to say that children had two personalities, that one in their house and a different personality at grandma's house. And, no one even said you had to do it. Kids just acted differently at home than they did at grandma's house. Well, today you see the reverse, where people act differently in public than they do on social media. And it's the barriers that have been broken down of decorum because of the distance that social media gives people, this plausible, you don't have to look anybody in the eye when you're talking to them because you're just typing. And
Right.
you have a different perspective when you treat people when you're looking at them than when you're not. And one of my favorite stories is there was a gentleman, a neighbor of mine, who was a physician, who went to my church, who was, I used to be a large person. I used to be, over 300 pounds. And this physician church going neighbor was fat shaming me on social media all the time. And so finally I sent him a private message. I said, I didn't know they taught fat shaming in medical school.
Ah,
And lo and behold, he stopped. So I think I touched a chord with him where he, hopefully he took a step back, because he hasn't posted since I sent him that private message. But the point is, here's a man who I would see at church, who never would come up to me and share his political views, but was fine posting angry posts on social media because it provides a distance between the human interaction. And I think
right.
that's one of the things that drives me on the behavioral health. I do a lot of behavioral health policy as a legislator. Is, post COVID, a lot of our kids are not comfortable just talking to each other, not interacting with each other. Even pre-COVID, they were more comfortable texting than they were talking. And even I've seen with my own staff where I'll with some of the younger staff, where I'll say, hey, call so-and-so. And then 3 days later, I'll ask them, did you call John? And they'll go, well, I sent him an email. I said, no, I didn't say email John. I said, call John. The default is to have the least personal interaction with people. And I think that's what's driving some of the vitriol out there. And I don't think you can deny the Trump effect in the political discourse. I mean, he's rewritten all norms of decorum and propriety, and has made, sort of given permission for people to be hyper vitriolic and angry. To make is, you can't deny the Trump effect on the discourse. I mean, when the president of the United States says it's okay to, be mean-spirited towards people with disabilities, it gives everyone else a permission slip to be mean. And that's unfortunate, that we have that type of leadership from the standard bearer of one of the political parties that is sort of justifying vitriol and anger and mean-spiritedness. And
Yeah.
we have to get back to common civility. We have to, I tell people, just because you disagree with a policy position doesn't mean we can't talk to each other.
And I
So,
think,
two thoughts on that. I mean, if it were just confined to Donald Trump, well, he's an old man. Eventually he'll be elsewhere. But his approach has spread everywhere. And part of the thing, he can't talk about policy positions.
he
He
doesn't.
doesn't have any. All he has is vitriol and hatred and finger pointing.
Well,
So
I think the other thing that's disappointing is, the Senate Republicans held Nixon accountable ultimately.
Right.
No one holds Donald Trump accountable, and I think that's the part where everybody becomes an apologist for his way. And that's an indictment on those folks who know better. They're smart enough to know better, but they're taking short. It's sad. My mother taught me, to be respectful, to be kind, to be nice. When I was on the city council, people would come up to me and say, why are you talking to that person? They're on a different position. And my answer would always be, my mother taught me to be nice. Doesn't mean I agree with them.
Right.
You just be nice.
Still have to get rid of the cat.
No.
So I wanted to ask, we see what's happened at the federal level, in Congress, how it's impossible to get anything done because of this breakdown in relationship. Do you see the same thing happening within the state?
Well, California is overwhelmingly blue. I mean, so we do have supermajorities in both houses of the legislature. I do see, obviously we want to be fair here to all sides. I do see that because we're so overwhelmingly blue, we tend not to include other perspectives because it's not required for the math. And so, one of the things I'm proud of is I've gotten some things through the system with bipartisan support, trying to find common ground where you can find common ground. And it's been great because when I have a core value disagreement with my Republican colleagues, they don't get mad at me when I look them in the eyes, but in particular on gun control. I've passed more gun laws than anybody in this, I think, in the history of the state of California. I've done more sensible gun control than anybody. And I don't get targeted by my colleagues because they know I've always treated them with respect when we have disagreements. Now I get attacked by the gun enthusiasts mercilessly on social media. They go after me. I'm the antichrist, person who, is they're celebrating the days when I'm not in office. So there's a disconnect between their leadership that have seen my deportment and how I conduct myself, than from the rank and file who just go after me because of they don't like anything sensible. Which I always say to people, my bill to say lock your gun. I don't know why that is even a partisan issue. If I say lock your car, that's common sense. So wouldn't lock your gun be common sense? If you let your 13-year-old take your car on a joyride and they drive through your neighbor's front window and run over grandma, you're going to be held accountable for what happened with your car. So if your teenager the same 13-year-old takes your weapon to school and shoots somebody, shouldn't we hold you accountable for what happens with your weapon? That's not partisan. That's common sense.
That's common sense.
You have to be 25 to rent a car, right? Nobody argues that that's some sort of a partisan plot, that it's a recognition that teenagers are lousy drivers. So we don't let you rent a car till you're 25. It's not partisan. So if we say you got to be 21 to buy a gun, we want you to be a more responsible adult before we give you the car. We want you to be a more responsible adult before we give you the gun. Why is that partisan?
Yeah, it's just plain common sense. So, Anthony, over the years, you've like you said, you have an extremely diverse community that you represent, multi communities. Are there any things that you've learned? I know that one thing is that you're from New Jersey, and you're from an Italian family in New Jersey, and I'm from New York. I'm from a Black family in New York, and
so that makes us brother and sister.
It sure does. It sure does. So, what have you learned? Because the ethnicities are different here on the West Coast than they are on the East Coast. And you are such a personable guy. You are right in there. You're talking to people. What have you learned about people in general?
So it's interesting. You'll appreciate this. Being an East Coaster, sarcasm is not something that Californians are comfortable with.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So I have had to rein in my sarcasm a little bit because, as not everyone out here understands that. The other thing that I remind people of is, if I give you my word, I keep my promise. I grew up with a code of, your word and your integrity are the most important things that you have, your reputation and how you treat people. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I've been able to navigate my district. The other thing that you'll appreciate, Sharon, is I go to so many events and people say welcome. And a lot of other politicians will come up to me and go, why do you go to so many events? And I go, because people say welcome. No one ever says, what are you doing here? And I think it's hard for some young politicians to understand that if you just go because you care and you want to learn and you're open, people bring you in. and then they do share. And what I've learned, and as you know, within Pasadena Altadena, I'm particularly close with the African American community, and I think one of the things that's always endeared me there, and when my mom was alive, my mom would come with me, and as you know, that's a grandma rich culture, with respect for elders. And I think if you show respect for elders, naturally, because it's how I was raised, people will share. And I always, Juanita Devon from Altadena Baptist Church was one of my closest allies and friends, and I always pride myself when she turned 80. I was the only politician invited to her 80th birthday party, and I can't wait till she turns 100, because I'm going to go to her 100th birthday party. And you hear, you listen, you talk. Joe Hopkins from the Journal, I sat down and he put all of his, the Journal, for folks who don't know, is the oldest Black newspaper in the San Gabriel Valley, and had a voice and a perspective. And Joe took the first 25 years of his editorials and put them in a book. And I read the book, and then I went to meet with Joe, and he was dubious that I read the book. And so when I started quoting from the book and I started pointing out things in his book that I disagreed with, he smirked and said, "You really did read my book?" And I said, "Absolutely. First of all, I wouldn't tell you I read it if I didn't read it." And I did read it. And then one of the things that Joe lamented in his book was that California doesn't do a lot with historically Black colleges, that we don't really do. We have all these great educational institutions, but we don't share, we don't welcome, we don't partner. And so I sat down with Joe, and then we brought together all the deans from the business schools from the UC in my office with African American business leaders and educators, and we created the Summer Institute for Emerging Managers and Leaders, which is a summer fellowship for students from historically Black colleges to go to the University of California business schools for a summer fellowship, to articulate into MBA programs. And that program is now in its, 14th year. And it's been very well received, but it had its genesis from a conversation with Joe Hopkins and his editorials. And I think that's the key. When you go to a Black church, don't just go to be introduced, stay for the sermon.
That's right. And you do.
Because you learn, the pastor has a perspective about the community, and the sermons are usually germane to what's going on at the time. You learn a lot when you go to a community meeting. Stay and eat. I used to say the difference between me and other politicians is they give speeches, I eat the chicken.
You ate plenty of it.
Right. And at all the banquets, it's grilled chicken, it's steamed chicken with then there's gravy and mushrooms, every banquet. And so you stay, you eat the food, it's just the time you can have camaraderie and listen. And so don't breeze through, stay, eat, break bread.
My son is running for office, Anthony, and I have watched you over the years. And I share with my son, Wade Kyle, who's running for Lomita City Council. And I told him one of the stories you told us about the first time that you ran and you lost by, I don't remember.
2 votes.
Oh my God. That story.
Yeah. So when I ran the very first time for the city council in La Cañada, it was the most bizarre story. It was before the Florida debacle with Gore and Bush. Yeah. But we had all the same issues. So on election night, the computer had me tied, but the subtotals had me winning. So if you totaled up as you went along, I was winning. But then when the computer spit out its total, it had a tie. So then they ran the ballots through the next day. And lo and behold, I was winning by 24 votes. So the subtotals were correct. So the computer expert hadn't cleared the machine properly the night before. And so when they ran all the ballots through the machine the second time, I was winning. Now, as the weeks went by and more ballots got counted, and the same day absentee ballots got counted, and then the provisional ballots got counted, over the next 3 weeks, my lead evaporated to 3 votes, and there were 9 ballots left to count. I had a 3-vote lead. There were 9 ballots left to count, and there were 4 candidates. So math-wise, I was looking pretty good. Of the 9, 5 were kicked out for various reasons. They were people who had voted twice by accident or whatever. So they declared 5 invalid. So that left 4 ballots left, and I had a 3-vote lead. And lo and behold, my opponent got all 4 of those ballots, the last 4 to be counted. And so one of the 9 ballots was declared ineligible because a woman voted outside the precinct. She was in a wheelchair. And so she voted outside the precinct and didn't sign her ballot properly. So they kicked that ballot out. That particular woman's precinct was my best precinct. I had walked her block. I had signs all over her neighborhood. And so I argued to have that ballot brought in. I figured, you know what, maybe I can tie this up. And lo and behold, my opponent got that ballot too. And so that's why it went to a 2-vote loss, because my opponent got the last 5 ballots counted. And we had all kinds of, there were chat issues and computer issues. Everything that happened in Florida, we had on a smaller scale a year before. So anyway, so I lost that race by 2 votes. And then that was for the special election. Remember, the gentleman passed away. And so then 11 months later, I ran for the general election, and I ended up getting the highest votes in the history of the city at the time. And at the time, La Cagnotta was overwhelmingly Republican. And here I was, the Italian Democrat from New Jersey, and I got 73% of the vote. And, you know, I think a lot of it was people just appreciated my positive attitude. And, you know, the lesson I learned in local government, which again, is something I try to share with people all the time, is explain yourself. If people know you have values, they can handle disagreement. What people don't want to hear is that it's the position of your party or it's a political decision. They want to know you're doing your values. And I share the story when I transitioned from the city council to the assembly. There was this very devout man who came up to me and had always been a supporter and was a very nice, devout, you know, person, soft-spoken. And he came up and he said, Anthony, you know, my wife and I, we love you. But when you go to Sacramento, please don't make it about the gay agenda. And he shared that with me. So I looked him in the eye and I said, Frank, I said, my older brother's gay. I said, I love my older brother, and I'm not going to let him have less rights than I do. You know, everyone should have the same rights. And I said, our founding fathers used the word all. They didn't use the word select. And I said, you're an attorney. You've taken an oath to the Constitution. You should support gay rights as well, based on the word all. And he goes, I understand. I understand. Do you know, every time I run for office, that man puts a yard sign in his yard? Every time I send out a solicitation letter, I get $100 from that guy. Here's a person who I have a core value disagreement with. But because I explained my position, I didn't say, well, it's the Democratic Party's position or it's politically popular. I said, these are my values. He could handle the disagreement because it's values-based. And that was the class I taught at USC between my time in the Assembly and the Senate. It was called values-based leadership. And I used to say to my class, I don't care if you're a Democrat, an independent, a moderate, a liberal, a conservative. I said, just know what you are and be who you are and lead from your values. Don't try to triangulate and shift. And as you've seen over time, there's been many politicians who have shifted their political party because they think it'll help them get elected. And lo and behold, they lose because the people say, well, what are your values?
Yeah, that's right.
So you have a long, effective career as a legislator. So I have 2 questions. Do you have any thoughts on the current local elections in particular? And what's next for Anthony?
Well, I'm mainly concerned about the presidential race. I mean, I think it's critical that Kamala Harris, who I worked for when I was in the assembly, she was in San Francisco at the time, and actually had a good relationship with her and saw her in action as a leader on the local level, and I've certainly been a cheerleader for her career, her entire time in office. But I think it's critical that she gets elected. The unchecked aspect of with the Supreme Court decision basically not holding the president accountable for their actions, I think is a dangerous construct with a man like Donald Trump having unfettered power. Um, uh, I think it is a concern. And when you have John Kelly and Mark Milley and revered 4-star generals who are Republicans, expressing concern about what a Trump administration would lead to, I think we have to heed that. And so I'm mainly concerned about that. That's my number one issue. Obviously for the Senate, we have Josh Newman down in Orange County, who's a terrific senator who's being has a tough reelection race. So I'm going to be going down to help him on Sunday to make sure we get Josh Newman. So those are my two top priorities. I try to stay out of LA politics as much as possible. Being a San Gabriel Valley person, so I don't typically play in LA. I try to focus. There's a Burbank City Council race. Judy Wilkie is a terrific local person who I strongly support. I live in Burbank now, and so that's my number one local race. Hoping that Judy gets elected to the city council. She's a lifelong Burbank resident, a lifelong Democrat, and very good on social issues as well as fiscal issues, and has no ambition other than to make sure Burbank thrives. And I think that's a good thing in local government. One of my observations is that a lot of local governments have become way too political. And again, I share a story about when the Patriot Act was going through. A lot of city councils were passing sort of ceremonial resolutions condemning the Patriot Act, and I took a different tactic. I actually brought constitutional scholars together and civil rights leaders and historical constitutional leaders together, and I actually had a forum on how during times of crisis we lose our civil liberties. And we had over 100 people come to a forum that I moderated with academics to talk about the loss of civil rights during the times of crisis. And I felt that was a far better way to get a point across than just politicizing a city council for a momentary soundbite. Bring in experts to really educate people about why we worry about the loss of our rights when there's a crisis.
Yeah, yeah. So Dick asked you a second part. So what's and this will be as we close, let's talk about your plans for the future, because this is your final legislative session and you'll be moving on. So let's
I don't know yet what I'm going to do. I mean, my poor wife is going to get me home on a full-time basis. So say a prayer for her. Because I bring disorder and chaos into the house because I'm all over the place. But I still have fuel in my tank. I'm proud of the record that I've been able to get through on behavioral health, on education, helping to raise funding for special needs kids, the dyslexia screening that we got through. California was one of only a handful of states that didn't screen for first graders for the risk of dyslexia. There was a huge social justice implication there because there was a study out of Texas that had 70% of the inmate population were dyslexic. And, if you're a suburban parent, you have got your pediatrician on speed dial and by Wednesday if there's a reading problem. But there's a lot of hardworking parents that just don't have that ability because they're working hard. They don't see their kids with learning disabilities. My mother didn't find out I was a dyslexic till the 8th grade. She was a single mom, a widow. And so, I'm proud of the work that we've done, but there's a lot of unfinished business. The governor vetoed my epilepsy bill this year, which would have modernized how we approached epilepsy in California. I want to keep fighting for some of the issues that drive me, which mainly are kid and family and behavioral health and education issues. So I've got fuel in my tank. I'm going to look at some of the academic opportunities. I really enjoyed my time teaching when I was out of the assembly. I enjoyed my time teaching in Armenia recently. And so I'm going to look at some of the academic opportunities out there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the state doesn't allow us to seek employment till we're out of office. So I've got to wait another month before I can go, formally ask people if they're interested in having me come teach and do other things. And so I'm not going anywhere. I frankly, I think the voice that I've brought to the political process of, just average people's perspective. And as you pointed out, Sharon, a lot of elected leaders don't meet and talk to people.
Oh, that's right.
They just don't.
A shame. It's a shame. And you established a model that I talk to my son about quite frequently. He is a teacher. He's
Right.
been a teacher with Los Angeles Unified School District for more than 20 years. And so now he's taking a different path. But I always talk about how you're out there, you're with the people, and that's what he's doing. And so you've set a good example.
Well, I appreciate it. I'll tell you a funny story. So for 20 years, I always had my telephone number. My home number was always listed on the state website. When we moved to Burbank, we lost our landline. So for 20 years of my political career, I've always put my home telephone number on the state's website. I've always put it on my material, and I've always prided myself that people could call me at home. And whenever I would give a speech and I would say to everybody, take out your pen, here's my home number, I'd give it to 500 people. And other politicians would come up to me and they'd say, so what do you say when people call you? And I go, hello. What do you say when they call you? I mean, you say hello, right? Because they were like mystified that I would give out my home number.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's so interesting, with my son doing this door knocking. I was a little worried,
Right.
He's been doing what he's loving it. He said people are so welcoming.
Exactly.
And my son is a Black man.
Right.
He lives in a community where the mayor is a Republican. There are few people in his neighborhood that have flown Confederate flags. So it's not necessarily the most welcoming community for a Black man, but he's saying that they're very welcoming to him.
I tell everybody, when you're knocking on doors, the most important thing is to smile and be warm. And, obviously your son has those qualities. And, the other thing is there's good doors and there's bad doors, but there's far more many good doors than bad doors. And people really do want to engage with their representative. People really do want to ask questions. And there's no better way to do it than being at the front door. I can tell you, I've been chased by a number of dogs. I've probably knocked on 35 to 40,000 doors in my when I ran for the assembly. I walked for 11 months. Everybody said, you can't walk. And I said, yes, you can. It's, I should write a book just about the doors that I've knocked on. Well, wish your son well. I hope he wins. And
we'll know in a few days.
We'll know in a few days. Well, it's always good to see you guys. Thank you for letting me share a little bit.
Thank you, and give your best to your family. Are you a grandfather yet?
No. We have one boyfriend in between my two daughters. We like him, and I'm very proud of my girls. One works in the film business and has a nice career, and the other is sitting home filling out graduate school. Wants to be a clinical psychologist and help other kids and other people. And so I'm very proud. And obviously, my wife puts up with me and has been a great partner in this journey for the past over 20 years. And, we'll keep doing something. And it's great to see you guys. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, it's been a pleasure spending this time with you. We're looking forward to seeing what happens in the future, because I'm sure it's going to be something interesting. It's something that's good for the community, whether you're an elected representative or just an engaged citizen. Thanks so much, Anthony Portantino.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Dick. Be well, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.